Not long ago, these people were serving customers on India's second largest airline. But in April, skyrocketing costs drove Jet Airways out of business, leaving staff out of work.
We can't pay our rents, healthcare bills, and children's school fees. Everyone here is distressed.
It's the fourth airline to go under this year after regional carriers Germania, British Midland and Iceland's WOW Air.
Fuel costs, labor costs, infrastructure costs that have negatively impacted the profitability of the airlines.
And rising trade protectionism could cause headwinds for those still in business.
You know, for us, imposing tariffs on any kind of goods anywhere in the world is a bad news. You know, we rely on open borders, open to people and to trade. So when everything that restrict trade, tariffs or whatever protectionist measure is a bad news for our industry.
The International Air Transport Association says costs in 2019 are rising faster than revenues, squeezing margins for air carriers. Their earnings per passenger have been sliced by 11% so far this year, and Iata cut its profit forecast for the industry this year from $35.5 billion to $28 billion. Lower earnings for airlines are casting a shadow over profits for aircraft makers like Boeing, which is also facing troubles of its own. Last week, regulators extended the grounding of its 737 MAX planes until August. Then on Sunday, it said other variants it builds may include faulty parts on their wings. Boeing's inspected 41 planes, but the US aviation regulator, the Federal Aviation Administration, wants it to check another 312 aircraft. And the US Securities and Exchange Commission is investigating whether Boeing is deliberately understating the cost of the 737 MAX groundings to protect its share price. Boeing's also facing lawsuits from the families of the victims of two recent crashes involving Ethiopian Airlines and Lion Air. And it's being sued by airlines that have suffered losses because of the grounding of 737 MAX aircraft. Settling those claims could cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and some analysts say that could mean more job losses across the industry. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
And Mobin joins me here in the studio now. Hi Mobin. As you mentioned in your story, Boeing's 737 MAX nightmare seems to be getting worse. It's now admitting that hundreds of other planes could be affected by defective parts in its wings. What is the plane maker doing about it?
Well, as you know, the first thing that they did was they informed the FAA about this fault that they discovered. The company initially wanted to test just about 4 dozen planes, but we've seen that regulators perhaps getting a lot more stringent on the company now, asking them to check hundreds of planes. And if you sort of just look back at what's happened since the two recent crashes, there was the discovery that many of the inspectors that the company had in place were inspecting their own work and essentially signing off on things that other people should have been signing off on. They've let go of 900 inspectors. So really, it seems that there is a deficit of trust. We've seen that in the hearings that have been held by lawmakers in the US, calling in senior members of not just Boeing, but also from the FAA. Of course, there is that criticism that the FAA itself is very close to the major company, to this company itself and many of its suppliers. So clearly, a big challenge for Boeing.
As you also pointed out, another major challenge that Boeing is facing is the mounting number of lawsuits, not only from airlines that have had to ground the 737 MAX aircraft, but also from the families of the victims of the two deadly crashes involving that aircraft. Just how bad could this get for Boeing?
Look, we know that the Chinese air carriers have together, they're planning to sue for about $500 million. That's a big amount. Just one of the victims from the family of one of the victims from this crash in France has announced just yesterday, or over the weekend rather, that she's seeking $276 million in damages. Really, what this number will end up being depends on whether negligence is established. Keep in mind that most of the victims here are claiming that after the first crash, the company knew there were problems with its planes and didn't communicate that effectively or in time. and saying that that is what led to this tragedy. So really, if that is established in any of these lawsuits, it could mean very, very big losses for the company. And then coming back to the first question that we were discussing, look, these parts, if they need to be changed on planes, these wing parts, it's coming at a time when this is peak summer travel season. You know, we have airlines like Southwest that operate only Boeing planes, and if they have to start replacing parts on their planes, they could be missing out on a big chunk of business at the best time of year. So perhaps some of them will also then be going back to Boeing and asking for compensation for those problems.
Interesting. Now, separately, the IATA, the industry body, says that 2019 will be the worst year since 2014 in terms of profits. Just how bad could this year get for them?
Well, just looking into that report, what we can see is that, in fact, the only side, the side of the business that's been hit so far is the freight business. IATA still expects growth to be about 2.4% globally, and they expect about 200 million more people to travel than did last year. But keep in mind, we have many regional issues that are yet to be resolved. We've seen that in the Middle East between Qatar and the other GCC countries not letting each other use their airspace. We've seen the same thing happening between India and Pakistan. India has reopened its airspace, but Pakistan hasn't for Indian carriers. And similarly, now problems with Iran, and a very recent warning a week back from the United States government about planes that are flying in that area. And then, of course, the trade war between the US and China, if it heats up any more, it could slow down the Chinese economy. And China has said before that it could use its tourists as a tool or as a weapon, depending on how relations play out. So really, if there's any hit on the passenger side of the business, perhaps these estimates could prove too rosy also.
Okay, so still many headwinds for the airline industry. Mobin Nasir, thank you as always.